Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Nicholas, hello, across the time zones. To kick off this discussion of the missing men, men who don't work for sometimes mysterious reasons, I think it's worth pointing out a bit of history, which is that in, say, the 1950s, certainly the heart of the U.S. economy, the most dependable demographic in the labor force was men between the age of 25 and 54. More than 90% of them were working. They were the heart of this sort of manufacturing-based economy. The number of these men, so-called prime age men, between 25 and 54, who are not working, has doubled since the 1970s. When you make international comparisons to say, is this happening just in the US, or is this something that other countries seem to be experiencing as well? The US seems to have the third lowest labor force participation rate in this group in the world. The two countries that are worse than us are Israel, which is a bit of an asterisk because it has a high number of Orthodox Jewish men who don't work for various religious reasons. And number two, Italy, which is just an economic omni-shambles, and we don't want to be compared to them in any respect. Nicholas, I'm glad I got you laughing with the word omni-shambles, and because of that, I'll go straight to you. This is obviously a complex phenomenon, but what do you think are the most important variables in thinking about why this group that used to be the marrow of the labor force is now seems to have declining labor force participation?
Well, thanks for inviting me, Derek. I just did a book on this very question called Men Without Work, America's Invisible Crisis. And over the last 50 years, we've had this kind of silent calamity in the United States where work rates for men have absolutely collapsed. Now, work rates for women have been pretty awful since the turn of the century, but the problem for men goes back way farther. We now have work rates for guys in the US that are actually lower than they were in 1940 at the tail end of the Depression. We'd have 10 million more guys with paid jobs if we had 1965-style work rates. So what's the reason for this? Well, we've seen a flight from work by men. In this prime male group you refer to, there are 3 guys not in the labor force for every 1 guy who's unemployed. So the unemployment rate no longer is such a super great indicator of what's going on in the labor market. It's clearly economic change, globalization, maybe trade, the decline of manufacturing jobs alluded to in the video, but it's other things as well. It's the rise of a new sort of lifestyle that doesn't involve paid work for guys, and it's not a happy story for the most part. Most of these guys are checked out of civil society. Most of these guys don't do child care or care for other members of their families. Well, a lot of this is supported in part by disability insurance, which wasn't made for this. The third thing we're really missing, and this has been out of the conversation almost entirely, has been the explosion of criminalization or criminality, especially for men. There are basically 20 million people not behind bars in America today who have a felony in their biography, more than 1 in 8 adult guys. This is a huge part of the men without work problem that we just haven't really wanted to look at.
And we are going to look at that very specifically in a few minutes. Kristin, same question to you. What do you think the discussion is missing when we look at this issue of the missing men?
Well, I think the discussion needs to focus on the ways that technology and automation have transitioned the kinds of jobs that are out there and available to people. Traditionally, men have worked in factories, they've worked in mechanical-based jobs, they've worked on jobs that have specific tasks that are set out, and we're moving to a world where most of the jobs that are available are those that are based around care or that are based around interactions that you can only have with people. And so thinking about sort of how to transition our thinking so that those kinds of jobs are appealing to everyone. We need to get away from this men are mechanical, women are wordy, and start thinking about things in terms of machines do one kind of thing and humans do the creative, strategic, caring kinds of things that you have to do in interactions.
Well, and to put a little empirical meat on those bones, I was just looking up the stats a few minutes ago. In 1954, 40% of jobs were in manufacturing or construction. Today, 13%. That is an enormous drop into industries that are incredibly male-dominated. And Kristin, you and I were just talking about this. I know this is something that Nicholas has written about as well. You look at the fastest growing jobs according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which does an okay job at predicting the next 10 years. The 4 jobs that are projected to grow more than 100,000 occupations in the next 10 years, all 4 are female-dominated. They are jobs like home health care aides, personal care aides, and marketing specialists. So this goes, Kristin, exactly to your point, which is that the economy itself seems to be moving away from the jobs that we historically think of as masculine towards jobs that are now at least feminine in terms of the people who are occupying them. How do you have a cultural shift where people can stop seeing these jobs as for men and these jobs as for women?
Yeah, and I think that part of the way you do that is to recognize that that's happening, and BLS, and not only in those 4 jobs, but in the top 20 of the jobs that the BLS predicts will be the fastest growing in the next 10 years, 13 of those are in care fields. And so getting there, thinking of those things entirely is we need to reformulate the policies that back up how we support care. And so thinking about things in terms of gender neutrality so that parental leave policies are just that rather than maternity leave policies. Family Leave Act is available for anyone to take so that if you're incorporating care into your work-life balance, it's possible to do that. And just thinking about sort of the strategic interactions and the way that all people need to be strategic in what the value add for humans exclusively is, that an automated job can't do, and then making the kinds of connections that machines can't do.
Well, and it's true that there are, I think someone else made this point earlier today, that there are lots of care jobs that do sometimes require a man to be the person who's doing it. So if you're a home health aide for an elderly man who's 75 and weighs 270 pounds, then you need an incredibly strong person to help lift that man and bring him to the bathroom and help him with the toilet and the shower. I mean, there are some jobs in these female-dominated industries that men can certainly do. And
you are seeing that to some extent. Like physical therapists, for instance, that is a 30% male industry versus nurses, which is a 10% male industry. And so there are jobs where it requires physical strength, it requires sort of the combination of caring and ability to think through the physical requirements of the job, and trying to reformulate those things into our conception of masculinity and femininity is a great thing.
Nicholas, to you, there was a bit of a debate, at least that I saw online, about whether or not the degree to which a lot of these men were essentially just playing video games at home, that they had just dropped out of the labor force and they were just spending a lot of their time just watching television and playing video games. What do you see these men are doing with their day, with their time, if they're not working and they're not taking care of kids? How are they spending their time?
Well, it's a really dispiriting picture. If you look at the time use surveys, you have to begin by listening to Gregory House, MD, and realizing that everybody's a liar. But once you take that data, you see a picture where about 1/10 of the missing men are adult students. They're training to get back into the game. Their time use patterns are basically the same as time use patterns for employed guys. The huge majority are in this NEET category, N-E-E-T, neither employed nor in education or training. And this is where it looks pretty grim. The self-reporting is basically no charitable activities, no volunteer work, almost no religious activities, almost no help around the house, very little help with children or others in the household, over 2,000 hours a year, full-time job scale of, as you say, watching television, videos, internet, handheld devices. Additional information shows, of course, that the NEAT group is much more likely to self-report illegal drugs. And on the basis of some work by Alan Kruger of Princeton that just came out last week, about half are taking pain pills in the previous day. So you have this picture of people, an awful lot of them, watching screens and on OxyContin or whatever. It's not the way to get back into the productive economy.
Well, so I actually want to build on that a little bit, the video game and screen content, because one of the things that Shift's doing and that we're trying to do with New America and Bloomberg is look at new ways to use technology to create innovations that help people get and keep the kind of jobs they want to do. And so if we've got a huge percentage of people that are playing video games all the time, let's look at ways to use video games to train and credential people for new kinds of work. So are there things that we can do that use a video game console and monitor and structure to help get people new kinds of skills? If you actually look at the console when people are playing video games, like there's statistics, there's what kinds of choices you make, there's all different kinds of things on the screen that actually look very much like monitoring the stocks and those kinds of things. And how do you think up new and innovative ways to connect people who are already doing what they're doing to things that'll be productive in society?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because when you read the statistics and you read the Time Use surveys and you realize that there's a lot of men who used to be working and are not working, and instead they're just looking at screens and playing video games, it's very easy, I think, sometimes to essentially self-report these figures and sound like you're tisk-tisking. Like you're essentially saying, what the heck are these guys doing? They're making incredibly terrible decisions, and shame on them. Not to say that we're speaking with exactly that tone, but it is a tone that I think is used toward this demographic. And I think that it's worth taking sort of the video game argument and turning it around just a bit. Because as Nicholas pointed out at the beginning of the session, a lot of these men we think, and this is according to a recent White House paper, a lot of these men who can't get jobs, they're young, they're black, they're less educated, they live in the South, and a lot of them have a criminal record. So it's very conceivable that a lot of them can't work because of their record. And if you think about the fact that the economy is moving toward jobs that have historically been filled by women, not just in nursing, but also in the service sector, I've talked to a lot of sociologists who have said, this is difficult to prove with the data, but I believe very strongly that something that's happening is that you have retail people essentially saying, we don't want to hire you because you have a criminal record, and we don't believe that someone like you can sell this, which is essentially saying, we don't think, we would prefer that a white woman sell our goods and not a black man with a jail record. And that is a really, really troubling thing, that really, where the solution, falls to to criminal justice. And to think that a lot of these men who for various reasons are being blocked out of the labor force can be home and not be completely miserable, but actually sort of enjoy themselves with video games. And the paper that looked at the video game time use found that these men were actually happier than men who were working 20 years ago. That does suggest somewhat that a slightly positive story to me in a weird way, which is that any time a rich country can make it a little bit easier to be poor, there's a risk in disincentivizing work, but there's also something good about making sure that people who are not lucky in this country are not also miserable. So Nicholas, I wonder what you think about that.
Can I build on that point of yours? I think it is an absolute scandal in the United States today that our government, in its great wisdom, has forgotten to collect basic data about the 20 million Americans not behind bars, living in society as a whole, who have a criminal record, a felony, or prison time. We don't have the data which would let us know what types of reentry programs work and what ones don't work as well. We should make it a priority in our country to try to bring people back into society and the economy who've paid their debt to society. And we're in the perverse situation where it is particular private sector companies like the Manpower Group, like Uber, who have vastly more information about what works and what doesn't work than our feds and our states and our localities. That's just wrong.
I wonder, because we're going to move into solutions for the last 3 minutes that we have, and I think that there will be a longer discussion on universal basic income. But Nicholas, I want to ask you first, and then to Kristin. You have written about the negative side effects of programs like disability insurance and how it can disincentivize work. Do you think that a universal basic income would have a similar effect, or are you more bullish on the possibility of, say, a doubled or tripled earned income tax credit or universal basic income to provide for some men that, through both faults of their own and faults not of their own, are not working?
Well, what the universal basic income schema leaves out are the positive impacts, first and second and third order effects of work as a vocation for people. I mean, there's just so much survey information showing that people find more meaning in life, they do more for others. There are many positive spin-offs on work as opposed to idleness, to make a distinction between leisure and idleness, which are two different types of uses of free time. I think there's a lot of potential for a reform of disability insurance. I mean, we can look at our friends over in Europe, look at Sweden, look at what Sweden's done over the last generation with its employment and disability policies. A sort of a work-first principle, which tries to empower people through training and education, and then incentivizes going towards job placement and towards showing up. I think this could actually make a big difference, even if we have a pretty lousy economy as we've had since about the year 2000.
It is, I think, an underrated fact that a lot of these Northern European, Scandinavian countries do have a more generous welfare system and have a higher share of prime-age men who are working. So it doesn't seem obvious that welfare necessarily discourages work all the time. Kristin, how do you feel about the discussion around a universal basic income and its ability to help men in this position or possibly discourage them from work in the first place?
Well, I think that it's good to start a discussion about universal basic income, and that everybody, that all options should be on the table when we're looking at how to sort of update and modernize our workforce for the 21st century and digital age. I think that we need more data before we are able to make any kind of decisions on that. We don't have any data right now on what the results are if you give people money and what they do with it, do they invest it in themselves, do they invest it in their communities, is it better to give it out in a short-term one-time burst? Is it better to give it out over the long period of time? We just don't know any of the answers to those questions, and before we can answer that, we need to get more information. But to go quickly back to the concept of the criminal justice system and sort of providing opportunities and new opportunities for people in the population of non-working men, I think that the non-traditional approach to work has a lot to say about that. These are easy using either on-demand platforms or independent contract work in general. There's a lot of opportunities to get into the labor force on a short-term basis, build your reputation, and then use that to try to be your entry point. I mean, maybe we'll get to the point where people can do short-term jobs in the care industry for a day or a week and prove their dedication to the job or ability to do it, and then sort of get a reputational rating the way you do on Airbnb. And I think that we need to explore all of the options on how non-traditional ways of working can provide new opportunities for this group.
That's great. Thank you. And we're out of time. Nicholas, thank you very much.
Good to talk to you, Nicholas.